Hi guys, hopefully you have gotten through chapter 28. I know that was a big chunk of reading again. The next chunk of reading is smaller though, so you'll be happy with that. We had the verdict in this series of chapters that you guys read, and we're going to do a Socratic seminar, and I'm going to be asking you guys some questions online about the verdict, but let's talk about it here a little bit too. There's some things I want to point out. Poor Jem has a really hard time with the verdict, right? He really thinks that it's in the bag, that there's no way they can lose this trial. So as all the jurors are reading their guilty verdicts, each one is like a stab in his back. Scout like can physically see him like kind of convulsing as he hears these jurors report that they're giving Tom a guilty verdict. So this is Jem's coming of age story too. He's growing up throughout this book. We've heard him like reprimand and talk to Scout about how, oh, she just doesn't understand that she's still a child. But he's still a child too. So even though he's growing up, he's getting hair on his chest and stuff like that, he's still got that innocence of a child where he just doesn't understand how they can convict Tom. He doesn't see the racial piece that's also factored into this scenario. So he's wrestling with that. Scout, though, noticed something before the jurors even reported their verdict. She noticed that they didn't look at Atticus, and as a lawyer's child, she knows that that means they're not going to favor Atticus. They're not going to say Tom is innocent. And I love how she says it was like Atticus was holding a gun with no bullets. And this is kind of a reference to that situation we had earlier in our story when Atticus killed the dog, right? We talked about how that was kind of a symbol of Atticus taking racism out of the town. Atticus is taking this dog with rabies out of the town so it doesn't infect the town. Well, this town is clearly infected with racism, right? And so it's like Atticus is holding a gun. He has the tool. He's done everything he can to get Tom the right verdict, but because of the racism, it's like there's no bullets in his gun. Like he's helpless. He just can't fight something this huge and ugly. But even though he didn't win, not all is lost, right? Because Scout and Miss Maudie have a conversation, and Miss Maudie points out to Scout that normally Atticus wouldn't get this case. Normally it would go to a different public defender, but Judge Taylor on purpose gave Atticus this case because he knew Atticus was the only one who would have a shot at keeping a jury out that long. And just the fact that the jury was out that long shows progress. Miss Maudie says it's baby steps, but it's progress, right? You can't change people's hearts overnight. You can't cure something like racism overnight. That's impossible. But you can start chipping away at it. You can start making people think and question whether or not what they're doing is right. And that's exactly what Atticus has done. He got the jury to stay out, and they were clearly questioning whether Tom was right. It was much better than them just going, he's black, he did it, and then it would take 5 minutes for the jury to come to that decision. But clearly there were people wrestling in there about who did it, and trying to be strong enough to say that Tom Robinson was innocent. There was clearly a push and a pull in the jury's deliberation. And we find out that one of the jurors was a Cunningham. And so that takes us back to the night at the jail, right? Where Scout made Scout made Mr. Cunningham, Walter's dad, stand in Atticus's shoes for a moment. She kind of diffused that mob mentality and got him to be more human again, to have more compassion. And so clearly Mr. Cunningham and the Cunninghams went back and talked, and there was a Cunningham on the jury who had something. He was impacted enough by that to question whether it was okay to just take a white man's word over a black man. So baby steps. It's all about getting people just to start thinking about things from another person's point of view, right? But Ewell's angry. So even though Bob Ewell got the verdict that he wanted, everybody in town knows that he's the one who beat up Mayella, and that ticks him off. So he goes and he threatens Atticus and spits in his face and says he's gonna get him if it's the last thing he does. And how big is Atticus? If somebody spat in your face, would you like be considering things from their perspective? Like Atticus says, well, think about it from Bob Ewell's perspective. I embarrassed him in front of the whole town, and if he has to spit in my face to get it out of his system, then so be it. Like who, I would not be saying that. I can tell you that right now. But here's just an example of what a character Atticus is. An amazing man here. Before that, I do want to talk about, I kind of skipped this, but how about the Black community? How appreciative they were after Atticus's presentation at the trial. So they're all, Scout and Jim and Dill were sitting with the Black people in the balcony because they weren't allowed to sit down with the rest of the people. And as Atticus is walking up, they all stand for him. Like, that is a powerful picture. If you're picturing that in your head, Atticus walking out of the courtroom and the entire balcony rising to their feet to thank him and show their gratitude for what he's done to Tom. They knew how difficult a case Atticus just got, and they saw that jury stay out for longer than any other jury would have stood out for. So the gratitude is just powerful. And then they also start bringing things to Atticus's doorstep, and it brings a tear to Atticus's eye, just to see how much they appreciate what he's done. So there's like some connection here. There's building of relationships and just some really cool things going on, despite the fact that Tom got the guilty sentence. So in addition to the Socratic Seminar and a couple of other assignments, we're going to be kind of looking at the Tea Party more closely. So Aunt Alexandra has a tea party at the Finches, and there's a lot of irony and hypocrisy in this tea party. You guys have an assignment to kind of look through that. So they're all talking about the poor people in Africa who don't have Jesus and all this stuff, and then the next second they're talking about how their Black servants are depressed and it bothers them that they're walking around all sulky and stuff like that. And so we see the hypocrisy. These are Christian women, right? And they're supposed to be the ones who are, love everybody, not, don't discriminate against Black people or be racist or something like that. And here they are, like, demonstrating these awful behaviors, which actually like amplifies how ugly it is to have these Christian women behaving like this. And I want you to pay attention to how the author set this up. This is part of your assignment. Why would the author have this set at the Finch's house rather than at Miss Merriweather's house, for example? Why would the author choose to, in the midst of this tea party, give us the information that Tom died? So Tom was shot, right, by the police, and that in itself is just awful. So Atticus thought that he could get an appeal, that they had a good shot at an appeal, and he mentioned Tom must have just been like so fed up with the justice system that he was going to try to take matters into his own hands, and you really can't blame him. I mean, he was probably at a really hopeless place there. So he is shot, and they find out during the tea party. And then Scout, here's another little instance where she has to grow up. So she's joining the women at their tea. So this is kind of like a superficial way she's growing up. She's being allowed to join the older women. And then she, after hearing this news about Tom, she and Miss Maudie and Aunt Alexandra, they have to go back in and put on their happy Christian faces and enjoy their tea, knowing this is going on, also knowing that Atticus and Calpurnia are on their way to tell Helen about her husband dying. So this is an instance, I think, where Scout is realizing what the world is like, that some women sit here and claim to be Christian and talk poorly about people, and then this goes on in the background, and then there's this like awful racism, and there's this man who's innocent who is dead now, and she has to, that's a lot for a kid to handle, right? So this is kind of an instance where she grows up. So kind of take a look at how the author presented that information. Why was the tea party set at the Finches? Why did we learn about Tom at that moment? Authors don't do anything. Harper Lee didn't do that by accident. She did that by design. So to continue, we have some irony at school. So this Scout kind of like is growing and all that. She sees like the hypocrisy in the tea party. She sees the irony and hypocrisy at school when they're studying democracy, which means there shouldn't be any prejudice. Everybody should have rights in a democracy. And this is like not adding up in her head. She's like, well, if we live in a democracy, why is all this racism? Why didn't Tom have rights? Why don't black people have rights? It's like not adding up. So she's starting to wrestle with these ideas in her head and trying to reconcile how they can exist in the same world, which they can't, right? So in this time period, we in America claim to have democracy when we really did not. So so that kind of all fuels Scout's coming of age story there. And before I move on to the last part, the Halloween party, I want to mention that they called Tom's death the senseless slaughter of songbirds. There's some alliteration in there, right, with all those S's. So again, that kind of fuels the title of our books, To Kill a Mockingbird. Killing Tom was absolutely senseless, absolutely uncalled for. And that fuels our theme and also supports the title of the novel. There are more mockingbirds in the story, though, so to speak. So let's go on to the night of Halloween. Scout says this was she and Jim's longest journey together. So it's right down the road, but it's their longest journey together. And she's kind of alluding to how they grew up the most in this like short period of time. This like little takes place in just a few hours, an evening, one night, but they learn a lot. They go through a lot together. So they go to the play. Scout's a ham. It's not the greatest costume in the world, but there she is. And on the way there, Cecil Jacobs scared them. So on the way home, when they hear that weird noise behind them, they think it's Cecil again. Really, it was Bob Ewell. So Bob Ewell, remember the threat he gave Atticus that he was going to get them, or he was going to get him? He went after his children. So he was going to kill the kids. That's the level that Ewell was at. So they didn't die. The kids made it out safe with the help of somebody. We're going to find out who in the next chunk of reading. If you haven't already read ahead, I know it's hard not to when you get to that point. But we find out Bob Ewell's dead at the end of this chunk of reading. So in the next short chunk of reading, you will be happy to know it's just a couple chapters. You will find out who did it. So happy reading. As always, I'm here. We'll be doing those assignments. Make sure you get those assignments turned in, and let me know if you're struggling with anything and if there's any way I can help. All right, guys, take care.